Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Christine Carnes. Christine, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I'd love to have you take a minute and introduce yourself for our audience.
Sure. So, Kristen Carnes, I am currently the Vice President of Global Channel Programs and Operations at Netscope, and I've been at Netscope for about 4 years. And it's an exciting time. Cybersecurity is a great place to be. Previous to that, I've been with several startup companies and have been through four IPOs and several acquisitions. So, really enjoy doing the building of a small business and seeing it grow.
That is quite amazing. Yeah, I was just chatting with you right before the recording. Is that when you were at Sky High, you were thinking about going out and raising money, and then decided, I guess, from a leadership perspective, to kind of pursue that McAfee acquisition. So tell us a little bit, what was the decade? You were at Sky High for a few years, but that decade in the sort of the 2010s, cybersecurity evolved substantially. So before we kind of come to the current moment, I would love to kind of hear your perspective. What was it in 2010s and how is it kind of different in 2020s?
I would say, in the 2010s, it was really cybersecurity was an up and coming thing, but the majority of products were still really based on prem, right? So people had hardware, they had gear in their offices, they had high availability, et cetera. And then the idea of cybersecurity and doing things in the cloud was kind of just really being discussed and starting to be developed by a few companies. Now, after that, we've seen a tremendous growth, obviously, in the cybersecurity space and particularly in the growth of companies that are growing out complete global platforms, not just having point products. Netscope's a good example of that. And there's a lot of competition and a lot of smaller organizations. I think this decade is going to be really, really ripe for a lot of acquisitions as some of the bigger hardware players really transition and try to get away from that and get into the more of the cyber and the cloud platform environment. And they've got to invest somehow. So I think we'll see quite a few acquisitions as we move forward. And I think the bigger players in the cybersecurity market that exists today will continue to exist and will be standalone public companies.
So when you think about sort of the 2010s or maybe, even a little bit earlier, we used to heavily use the word channel, right?
Mhm.
And today it's the default de facto word is ecosystem. So let's talk about from a sales perspective. What was the model in 2010? Is it any different now, or was it roughly the same about a
Um,
decade ago?
yeah, I think it's quite a bit different, to be honest with you. I think when we talked about channels, we really talked about routes to market, and they were really about the sales transaction more than anything else. And so, for example, you had resellers and distributors, you had some service providers, and obviously the telcos, but the majority of product at that time really kind of went through what I'd call the traditional channel, where you had a reseller who was capable of putting together a solution that might have multiple products in it and taking that to their customers, and they would procure that either from the vendor or through a distributor. And so we kind of talked about that as a channel. I think in today's world, with all of the information available, customers are very, very smart. And they think about what the ecosystem of partners that they want in their environment. And so it goes much farther than just putting together a solution and includes things like technologies that work together that may just be alliance type of relationships. And so those are kind of captured within the process now. And I think a lot of customers really do look across the entire ecosystem. And it's not just about the procurement, it's about the long-term investment as to how those products are really going to work together. And customers do a lot more research today. They don't just wait for a salesperson to stop by and share their portfolio or products with them. I think they really are very smart, and they go out and they look at the analyst reports and they look at what's available to them. So it's definitely a more of a holistic approach to purchasing than it was 10 or 15 years ago.
So I'm going to come to your current role in a bit, but I want to kind of dial back, some of the previous roles you had. And one of the, important area that you led is in distribution.
Mhm.
So when it comes to distribution, traditionally, we've always said distribution is kind of a bank and a warehouse. They store your product, they manage your logistics. Of course, you can have funded heads and they can help you with partner recruitment and stuff and other programs. But as things moved in the cloud, they don't have things to store anymore, right? So what has happened to distribution over the last decade or so, and where do you think it is today?
I think that's a very accurate statement, honestly, that the pick, pack, and ship that we all relied on was really what the distributors did for us. And I don't want to belittle the fact that they still do that a lot today, right? Whether it's laptops or it's iPads or it's product, bigger product or whatever, they still do those fundamental things, and they do add value to the business by doing that, and currency conversion and other things that are important to your point with being a bank for us. I do think that distributors are in a position right now where they have to embrace the cloud, and they have to think about who they're partnering with. And so some of the bigger distributors have actually, aligned themselves with people like AWS because they need to have those relationships, and they can work with their vendors that are cyber centric and partner with AWS and create their own platforms. And most of them have done that. I would say there are a few who are lagging behind, and I think they are at the greatest risk. I think today the distributors need to embrace, and the bigger reseller partners, et cetera, need to embrace partnerships with Azure, with Google, with AWS, and understand their routes to market and understand how they can add value to those transactions. And so we do see the distributors that really are forward thinking are doing that today. But it's definitely, it has to be done with intent, and it's at the expense of their own standard business, I think, if they don't do it.
So when you think about, even sort of a decade ago, outside the broadliners, in security, I remember it's almost a couple of decades ago, and when I was at SonicWall, we had a lot of specialty small distributors, especially when you went to Europe and Asia Pacific, simply because the fragmented nature of the market. They were, country specific or Nordic region, they will have one, distributor, but they won't be like an Ingram or a Tech Data. How is that landscape today from when it comes to cybersecurity? Are still, of course, the broadliners play, but do you still see those smaller players exist? Are they growing? Are they kind of shrinking? What's happening to the tier two distribution?
So I would tell you that they do still exist, and I think some of them have created very good specialty niches, maybe vertical markets, et cetera, that they do very well in. I will say though that there have been a lot of acquisitions. So if you look at like Ingram and Exclusive Networks as an example, they have been doing acquisitions to gain footing in other parts of the world, right? So things like a really great distributor down in Australia was acquired by Exclusive Networks to get into that market. And so I think we're seeing that. Where I'm not seeing as much of that yet is Latin America. Latin America is still so very diverse. There are a lot of smaller boutique distributors. They might be, I'll call them a regional distributor that sells across multiple countries in Latin America, but there aren't a lot of the bigger broad lines haven't done as many acquisitions in that part of the world. It's really been focused mostly on Europe, Africa, and across Asia.
So when you go to Asia, do you see the footprint similar to Latin America? Like when you take out China and Japan and Korea
Sure.
out, and maybe India out today, Southeast Asia, do you see the broadliners is definitely growing through acquisition, but do you see also smaller players coming to the market, or is it pretty much who used to be there?
I wouldn't say I've seen a lot of new, and maybe a couple new guys, but generally speaking, there are a lot of in-country, really, really good distributors that have not been acquired that do really good work for us in places like India, Singapore, Philippines, and they are distinct and unique when I look across that part of the world.
Now, distribution also has been a source of sales engineering, right? Because one of the major funded area companies have put dollars in to, especially complex product like cybersecurity or
Mhm.
identity management or any of those nature that really support partner, maybe at the tail level or a middle of the band level to support them on deals. Do you see that still happening, or is it predominantly taken over by vendor because it's all software and they don't have that level of expertise in the distribution level?
I would tell you that I would see most vendors are still leveraging the investments that the distributors are making in like cybersecurity labs or those kinds of things, because the partners still really love to go to the distributors for a lot of enablement. And so I would tell you that we leverage the distributors a lot to do training, education, and really on the technical side in terms of being able to do a proof of value or proof of concept for customers of their resellers. So we do leverage that predominantly. We do it across ASEAN and certainly in Latin America.
Well, one of the things a couple of decades ago, one of the biggest thing distribution struggled with outside talent was cash flow financing, right? Because they would not be able to extend the terms that like an Ingram on Tech Data did to a smaller partner. But especially last 5 or 6 years, private equity has gone into distribution to really bring in, I wouldn't say small business, but lower than tier that the broadliners play. Do you see financing, how distribution plays, has it changed in your space much, or is it roughly the same? Does it vary by geo? Where is financing at?
Yeah, I would say what's available varies by the distributor as well, right? The broadliners have more of a portfolio of offerings. And even though you're dealing with software, et cetera, there are times when, to your point, extended terms or some kind of being able to leverage monthly payments versus annual payments. Those are really the things that we see. I would say a lot of customers are looking to do more of a consumption type of model. And so the distributors are starting to offer monthly payments, even if the vendors are still requiring them to pay annually. So that's where I'm seeing the greatest growth from a financing perspective, specific to cybersecurity.
And the hardware as a service also, I mean, is
Mhm.
it fair to assume that distribution is financing a lot of those too, or what do you see on the hardware space?
Yes, they are financing hardware still. That's been a pretty classic example. But again, a lot of the hardware like for SD-WAN type of products and things, those get bundled into the whole cybersecurity deal. And again, they want to pay on a monthly basis. They don't care that it's hardware versus software. So we do see that financing still happening. I haven't been in touch with like a really hardware centric business for a while. So I couldn't tell you if the offerings are exactly the same, but I would assume that they probably are from a financing perspective.
15 years ago, when we started Zinfi, we started as an agency, and McAfee was one of our major customer. And one of the first few projects we worked on was partner recruitment. And we would go work with Ingram and Tech Data. They would have a
Mhm.
list, but we would have our telemarketing team out of Utah, call out, drive partners to webinars, and then whoever is interested would hand over the channel account managers on the McAfee side, and they'll follow through. Does distribution play a role anymore in recruitment, or is it predominantly driven by brands today?
I would say that distribution does have a role in recruitment if that's something that you're really looking for. If you're looking for some set of unique partners, particularly if you're looking for something, let's say a vertical market like healthcare, where there are specialty partners that maybe they're not kind of very mainstream, and you're looking for that kind of addition to your portfolio. They do have the data to be able to profile the right partners and make it bring them into your business. So I do think that partner recruitment is part of that. I also believe that a lot of the cybersecurity organizations today, again, everybody's growing so quickly that they really do have to rely on distribution for partner recruitment, partner enablement, and things for that long tail of partners. But the kind of the 80-20 rule where you have a really close touch with your top tier of partners, regardless of what the partner type is. But even in the world of MSPs, the distributors can add value to those partners and get them up and running and help get them trained. So I think that distribution still has a role to play there for sure.
So, Christian, I'm going to come back to this whole sort of life cycle journey of the partner, and depending on whether you're starting up, scaling up, or growing, how you approach the ecosystem. But I would love to spend maybe a couple of minutes on your current role, because you have several very important pieces to it, from an operations, from programs, and strategy
Mhm.
wise. So can you kind of break that down, what that is, how what are your primary KPIs and objectives, what you're trying to do, and then we'll come back to these segments, because you're one of these very few leaders that I've had who has gone through startup, scale up, and growth phases, and including working in large companies. So I want to take your title and put that from the context of partner ops, because that'll be one of our main topic in the Denver event that you'll
Mhm.
participate. So I'd love to kind of hear from you what your role really means from an overall perspective today.
Sure. So let me talk a little bit about kind of when I came into the business. When I came into the business 4 years ago, all the regions were doing things very uniquely and differently. There wasn't really global oversight in terms of programs. And so in working with the various teams across the world, my very first objective was to create a fundamental partner program for the reseller community that we had and make that scale globally. So our partners had consistent discounting, consistent percentages around deal registrations, and we created a tiered program, pretty standard, but we applied it across the entire world. So that was the first thing that we did, and you can imagine that required a lot of operational work as well to create things in the systems that automated discounting based on the partner levels and applied deal registrations and things like that. So I was very heavily into the operations component of that from the get-go. From there, we really looked at where do we need our business to go. And one of the fundamental decisions that we made was that we needed to really enable our partners to deliver services. We were never going to hire enough people to do services. So we kind of pivoted from the primary program, and then we went and really looked at our services partners and created an enablement process for them and a quick onboarding process so that the partners could start to work directly with our teams and actually, get comfortable being able to provide the services implementation and really the deployment and ensuring that products were fully deployed at the customer sites. With that program today, we roughly have about 75% of our deployments done by partners. We have cutoffs where the smaller deals are always done by partners, and that's been a huge incentive for partners to work with us because we don't compete with them for services. We want them to do services, and that's how they make their money, right? Selling annual licenses is one thing, but the money's in services. So once we had the services piece up, the next thing was really to get a managed services offering, which included having tech support training and having a program around that. So really is also looking at how could we expand our routes to market, because we hadn't been working with MSPs or with the major telcos. And today we have those relationships and we have large investments with the bigger telcos around the world. And so we created that service provider program because that's how they go to market. They provide the services for their customers, they take the support, and they manage the entire environment. And so we went down that road. And then as we did that, we also looked at our global systems integrators who do very similar things. And so we opened up our GSI markets as well with programmatic support for them. So really over the last few years, we've expanded our routes to market. And now we're launching actually a global distribution program that allows us to make compliance requirements, et cetera, as we prepare to go public. So those are kind of the fundamentals of the programs that we have rolled out. And then I also manage our channel operations team. I'm part of the go-to-market operations organization in the business. And that team resides in India, and they really do all the infrastructure support for our entire global channel organization.
So I'm going to kind of dial back and maybe simplify from a framework perspective, because I would love to have you apply that in startups and scale ups and growth, which is, you kind of said first was alignment, making sure the regions are aligned. Second was putting infrastructure in place to build efficiency and effectiveness possibly. And then the third phase, you said expansion, which is kind of going after expanding route to market through MSP and other service providers, right? So when you first came in, did you know exactly what the scope is going to be? Like you sat down with your leadership team or you handed over a KPI and say, 100 days, Christine, turn this thing around. Like, what was the discussion like?
The discussion was very, very honest about we don't have what we need to continue to grow this business. We're kind of stuck. And so that the initial objective was, in less than a year, we need to get all these things done so we can have the kind of fundamentals of a program that will help us be able to scale into other routes to market. When I came in, I wasn't super clear that how diverse it was through each region. Like some regions had 2 tiers and some regions had 3 tiers, and they were just on paper, right? It was nothing that was really enforced. It was nothing that was operationalized. So I had to work with the teams to, in the kindest way possible, tear that down and say, here's where we're going to go, right? And get everybody on board. You have to have a lot of constituents around the globe. Everybody wants to participate and lean in. And so that's what we did. And we kind of came to what the solution was and then integrated these discounts into our pricing model, into our quoting tools, et cetera.
So if I kind of go back to that time frame, right? Like, what was your journey like in the first 100, maybe the first 6 months? Where did you start? What did you do? Like operational perspective, how did they bring them together? I'm sure there are a lot of things were sacred that people didn't want you to tear down. Walk us through that journey for the first 3 to 6 months.
So coming in the very, kind of getting the first lay of the land in the first 3 months, I was here was a lot of questions to the people that were here running the channels, working, with the channel partners. And I would ask questions about how many partners do we actually have, right? And then I come to find out that, well, anyone could just create an account in Salesforce and check a box that said that they were signed, whether they had a contract or not, as an example. So I had to kind of put my foot down and stop the madness and said, no, we need to really actually analyze how many partners we actually have that are signed. And so we did that work and we came to a number and it made sense. And then we started implementing processes, right? So create a prospect partner account, but you can't really say that it's signed until there's actually a contract in place. So we did have to implement some of those kind of operational stakes to get to the baseline of where we really were so we could determine where we wanted to get to in terms of the numbers of partners and types of partners that we wanted. So that was kind of the first thing I had to do, was really get the lay of the land from all of the different teams around the world. And I would say, even though I had to implement some things that created change, everybody understood what the long-term goal was, right? So if you share what the vision is and where we're going to get to, and here are some things we have to do now to get to where we want to, people will buy in. So that's really kind of what we had to do. And then from there, working with the operational teams, the pricing teams, et cetera, to figure out how do we create discounting, how do we create a margin for deal registration, et cetera, and then operationalize that into the systems.
So looks like, you made a lot of decisions, and data definitely played a part of that.
Mhm.
How easy was it to get data from different regions to sort of figure out, what is really going on, and then kind of rationalize to make sure that you didn't chop something up that will impact revenue negatively. So what was that process like? Like, who helped you? Did you have infrastructure people? Like, what was the team like? How did you pull that thing together?
So at that point, we didn't even have the channel operations team at all. So I worked with some of the other ops teams. I worked with the Salesforce teams. I worked with, finance and all the various places where you can go to get that data. And a lot of it was actually just learning how to run your own reports and figure out what deals, how deal registration worked, and really then creating a process that was much more scalable and created greater confidence with our partners. So it was really spending a lot of time with the various regions and listening to them. I think a lot of what you have to do when you go in and you're going to have to make changes is listen and have some empathy for how they got to where they are. And then again, share that strategy with them and share the vision and get them to understand what you're going to do and how you're going to make it better for their whole partner community.
And how big was the partner base, and how big is it now, and what percent of it do you have to kind of turn over, prune, add, like on a macro level?
Yeah, so at the time, I think globally we had just under 1,000 partners. When I came in, the teams were saying, oh, yeah, we have 3,000 partners. Well, they weren't 3,000 partners that were active, and some of them weren't even signed. So I had to wheel back and look at the numbers, right? So we had roughly a little less than 1,000 partners. Then we kind of started to take a look at how do we want to differentiate the partners through the various levels, right? How many partners should we have at the top, and who's really doing the revenue, and who's really bringing us opportunities, and do all those analytics and come to some requirements around the program. And honestly, that wasn't very difficult to do. The hardest thing was to really look at that long tail of partners that we had that were signed that were not productive. And so when we implemented the program, we created a requirement that if you've been a partner for longer than a year, but you haven't transacted, we move those partners to an inactive status, because there's no point in us spending time and energy and resources with giving them access to things if they're really not going to use it. So we kind of wheeled back a little bit, but then we really went into recruitment mode. And so by the time we got through the first year of the program itself, we were about around 1,200 partners. Today, we have a little over 1,600 partners that are actively selling with us.
And how did you add those additional 400?
Some of it was just recruitment of partners that tend to be laggards of adopting new technology, right? Even some of the biggest partners don't jump in first. You have to prove that you have a viable business. A lot of times they have to see you in competition, frankly. And when you beat them, they become interested. So that was a lot of it. That just takes time. The other was actually opening up the other routes to market. So opening up the telcos and service providers and adding those to our portfolio.
So one thing I found intriguing about your title, and maybe it maps to the journey, maybe it doesn't. You have the sequence of the word operations, then programs, then strategy. It would think it would be start the other way around: strategy, programs, and operations. So is it because it evolved, or you kind of see in an established organization, first thing you got to take charge, therefore operations comes first? Like why did you, when you did your LinkedIn, why did you put it in that sequence?
I think part of it is that the strategy part is sometimes kind of becomes a result of what you can do operationally and programmatically. And so, unless you're a very well established business, you don't spend as much time on strategy, right? I mean, we're out there fighting for deals every single day. And if the operations and programs things aren't working, then there is no point in having spending
So
tons of
it's kind
time
of a
on
large
strategy
scale
things.
startup.
It is,
You're
right?
kind of
Yeah.
like, yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't think that's true in bigger organizations where you can plan out quarters and quarters in advance. right? For me, I'm looking at it. We just started our second quarter at the beginning of May. And so I'm like, I'm still worried about what we're going to get done in Q2 and the beginning of Q3. And I can't really see my way to Q4 yet.
But one would think, you're close to 3,000 employees. So one would think, beyond 1,000, you're an enterprise. So, but it is kind of refreshing to see that spirit is very much alive, from a speed of execution wise. But then from an infrastructure wise, maybe you can share a little bit of your journey and your vision. Like at the end of the day, access to data, making them available to the people so that they can decide quickly, and then having the right structure so there's not in level of approvals needed on certain things. Like how did that come about over the last 3 years? Like when you started versus you pruned, then you added, and despite company growing quite a bit over the last 3 years, you're trying to still attain or maintain a certain velocity. How did you get there through structure and programs wise?
So a couple of different things. One is I think we added some tools that which really help, with the speed and the ability of being able to be more agile and kind of increasing productivity with tools. Another thing that we use quite frequently now, honestly, is AI, right? So that's something that has come in to where my ops team, we can use some automated AI to answer questions that are like our most asked questions, particularly for new employees, et cetera. And we don't have to do it. We just have we have an AI bot that can do those things for us. So those are a couple of things that I think have helped with the acceleration for sure. The other piece is investing in our partner portal. We have a platform for our partner portal. It syncs with Salesforce, and we're actually going through a refresh right now and adding some additional content and additional enablement pieces, because we've got to get more of our partners doing self-service, because they're coming on board faster than the number of people that we're hiring. So enablement in the partner portal has become a real critical need for us as well. And that's something that has also grown over time. And so I think those are the kinds of tools that have helped us along with the journey.
So from the 1,600 partners that you have, do you sort of a classic tier, like, certain percent of them are managed directly, certain percent are managed by the field at, sort of a territory level, and then you have a tail that goes through distribution, or how is it structured, your infrastructure wise?
That's pretty close to what it is. We have some dedicated resources with our biggest partners, right? And part of even being a vendor with those partners is having that investment and making sure that you have both the technical and the sales investment, right? The kind of business development investment that you need to be successful with them. And so we're kind of selective about how many of those we have because we have limited resources. And then to your point, we do have a territory structure for our channel managers that are out there, and they have their focus set of partners that they work with across their different regions. And those vary by region depending on, field relationships, et cetera. Same with our channel SEs. They're out there doing the same thing and enabling those biggest partners. The enablement of our long tail of partners is done predominantly by our distributors around the world. Again, a lot of the technical training, et cetera, we've enabled them to do that. And we've done train the trainers with them so that they can reach that longer tail. But we also, as I mentioned, a lot of that enablement for that long tail is also done through the partner portal. And of course, we have requirements in our program around enablement so we can track and make sure that we know that the partners are getting what they need.
So from a program perspective, do you have multi types of programs based on those tiers that you have, or you have set up horizontal programs? Like, what are the programs? And that's one. And second is, how long do your programs typically last?
So we just did a refresh of our program, our core program just this year. So that the previous one lasted about 2.5, 3 years. And then we kind of did a refresh of some of the requirements and some of the asks from our partners. We run incentives as well, and those incentives usually last 6 months to a year. I will tell you that when you run programmatic incentives, whether it's a rebate structure or it's something that's based on individuals, my experience is that it takes partners a long time to consume and understand incentives. You can't change them super frequently because they just don't get ingested, right? You can't run something for one quarter because you won't really get success. So typically we run programs for at least 6 months, many of them for a full fiscal year. And then we'll change through the year. And sometimes we'll add like bonuses to existing incentives and things so that at the end of the year, we have, reasons for partners to sell more product, et cetera. But typically we run things for about a year.
And from a deal size perspective, Christine, does it kind of vary all over, or do you have roughly a range that they tend to fall in?
What we call our mid market would be what might be termed as commercial, and those transactions are they can be anywhere from $30,000 up to $1 million or whatever. But the majority of our business today comes from our large enterprise and majors accounts and global accounts, and so longer sales cycles. Those can be 9 and 12 month sales cycles, but those are the transactions that are the multi-million dollar kind of transactions that we see. So our technology, because we have a broader portfolio now than we even did 4 years ago, there are smaller solutions that can be put together that really are starting to feed the mid market. Where the business really started was really at the very high end with the CASB product, which really requires that you have quite a bit of data for you to have the need to have it. But that's not really the mainstay product anymore. So we've definitely gone downstream and are hitting more of the mid market. We also have several of our MSP partners that work in that space. Particularly, we have a couple that focus on verticals. We have one that focuses on retail. We have one that focuses on like regional and small and online banks. And so those MSPs manage those customers for us, and they may sell the whole portfolio or part of the portfolio, but the customer may not even know what they have.
So now that I roughly have a sense, your world, I want to kind of take that experience that you have, and not just at Netscope, but McAfee and other places, kind of dial back and say, let's say if you joined, a startup, 100 people, maybe a couple hundred people, 30 to 50K ACV, they're trying to build, a partner program, taking your framework, sort of strategy, programs, and operations, right? What would be your approach in the first 100 days, 3 to 6 months?
So I think understanding where the technology fits and what the partner profile looks like and what partner recruitment needs to be done and who are those most likely suspects, from a partnering perspective, assuming the business is looking to grow the partner community. And that may start with some very light touch programs, maybe only deal registration or something. Coming into very small startups, which I have done before, you really don't need to over program it. When I came in here at Netscope, things were pretty well underway. But when they're not, I really suggest that you don't over program. You really look at what you can do with specific partners and lean into those partners and get your field teams leaning into those partners if you want to make them successful. You've got to start bringing them deals to get something in return. So it's really about very tactical motion and working with partners that are interested in working with new technology and understand the market and that fit the profile to be successful with whatever product you're selling.
And you described the Netscope journey, so I'm going to kind of leave it that at the enterprise level, and use those as a bookend. But if you come into the mid market, you're a few hundred, people, maybe couple hundred resellers you have or partners you have of various types. When you go in there and the mandate from the leadership is, Christine, grow this part of the business, what would be your approach in that case?
So in that scenario, that's similar to something I've actually done in my past. In that case, I'll look at some of the what I would call the bigger broadline partners and really invest in those partners and start with them and have the teams committed, have your sales organization committed to making those partners successful. To get any real attention from those partners, you have to really start selling with them first before you go meet with their leadership, right? Come back and say, hey, look, we already have pipeline. We've closed so many deals. We really want to make this thing go. Once you do that and you show some success, then other partners start knocking on your door. And a lot of those will be smaller regional partners that really they have a good solid customer base and they really like new technologies. Typically, what will happen over time is that you'll outgrow those small regional or local partners, but they can be really fantastic as a starting point. So that's kind of how we look at it. Bookend like maybe a couple of the very large broad lines and then start looking for those small early adopters of technology that like to take new products into their existing customer base.
So if I take these three segments, right, this sort of SMB, early stage, mid market, then enterprise, like where you're in Netscope, and then let's overlay, AI onto it, like someone like you coming in, not 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but coming in today, and you're like, okay, should I hire somebody or should I put some agents together, right? How real is that conversation today? Is that, are you going to invest in AI first? Or are you going to hire someone who has done this before? Are you thinking about that trade-off today? Because every time we open a channel or a podcast or wherever the headline is, these jobs are going away. And I'm looking at our customer base, that I use our PRM platform, and I'm like, it's going to take a while. So what is your take on inclusion of AI when it comes to channel ops or partner ops?
So I can tell you that for myself and for us as a business, we are leaning heavily into AI. I actually have an open headcount and I use AI to create the job description as an example, right? I think there's a fine line of having people that have experience and know how to do certain things versus being able to use AI to potentially augment that. But I don't think AI is ready to take over everything from a program development perspective. There are always nuances to what we do, and those nuances require experience. I do think there's a great place for AI to help us do things more efficiently and much more quickly. If you gather some data, you gather content together, and you go to AI and say, all right, consolidate this into 3 pages for me, right? Then you can see what you get. There's going to be mistakes. It's not perfect. AI is not perfect yet. So you do have to be thoughtful and considerate and learn how to do prompts. I think there is a great place for it, though, in making us all a lot more efficient and really, cutting down on the cycles that we have to do to create and develop things. But I don't think it's going to completely replace people's experience that have done these things before in from whether it's creating programs, running an operations team, the job of a channel manager or a channel or a sales director. I think those things are going to be alive and well, but I certainly think that AI can help us.
So let's talk about this job that you have open, right? That you're looking for, or maybe you have filled. Let's take the context, the same scope 3 years ago and the scope today. You're looking for a certain individual. In the job description, other than using AI to write it, what are you looking for any specific skills that you expect this individual to bring in when it comes to, AI or prompting or agents or any other aspects of it?
I think it'd be interesting to during the interview process to see how comfortable they are with AI. Have they started to use it? Right? Have you explored Chat GPT or are you using Gemini with Google? And what content have you developed utilizing the tool? Right? Because I think people need to get comfortable with it. But again, hiring somebody that has experience with some of the technologies that we use, like our partner portal and Salesforce and all of those things, is also as equally, if not more right now, more important to me. I think we're all going to continue to learn how to best navigate and use AI tools in our everyday lives, not just at work.
We're an incredibly heavy user of AI, especially when it comes to software engineering. I don't know, do you know Antonio Caridad from Tricentis, but he heads their partner ops. So we had him on our panel in Austin,
Mhm.
and we use Tricentis tools in our QA automation. It has had profound impact, like almost 10,000% increase in productivity.
That's
Where we used to need 15 people, like 2 people can do the job today. So we're seeing profound impact on the delivery side. Of course, then we're also seeing on the front end marketing and sales tools people are using it. But I'm always intrigued to know, like, because channel is such a complex place to be. You have different stakeholders, different regions, different languages, various types of partners of various skill sets. You have regulations in place,
Mhm.
different countries. So when you think about next 12 to 18 months, Christine, through your crystal ball and this incredible experience that you have, what do you think is AI is kind of stay at the surface that we polish up our articles, or do you see applications that will make your life easier, from an infrastructure perspective that you see are kind of seeping into place?
I do think there are going to be applications from an infrastructure perspective that will, I don't think it'll completely mitigate our requirement to hire people, but I do think we can augment and have our people doing things that are maybe more difficult or require a higher level of thinking than some of the task things that they do today. So again, that's what I'm trying to work on with my team is what are the things that we could do, we could potentially completely offload to AI that they do on a regular basis. And I have plenty of other things that they could spend their time and energy on. I mean, it's not going away. It's only going to become better and better and probably more intrusive into our world. And so I think if you're not going to embrace it, it's going to pass you by, and it's going to be a skill set that's going to be required by employers when you're working in sales, marketing, development, all those things. I think it's going to be something that people are going to have expectations around.
I did a podcast with Kyle Edmund Hayes. He runs a small consulting company out of the UK. His background was in software engineering, and he moved into channel ops and partner ops. And he's very much focused into, this AI agent stuff. And I was having a discussion. He said there's a lot of interest in proof of concept, but the clarity is still not there how they get embedded into the partner ops. Are there pilot projects are you looking at? Like, what is your expectation next 12 to 8 months, 18 months? Does it have a 1% impact? Does it have a 10% from an operational cost wise? If you're looking for automation to drive efficiency, is there any expectation of that kind?
I don't know that I have a number in mind necessarily in terms of my expectation, but I certainly see the impact that it will have, and I see the impact that it'll have in things like our partner portal and an enablement, and being able to put people on journeys and leveraging AI for when they have questions versus having to come and find my team or a channel manager or somebody else, and being able to have something that will actually be able to respond to them and help them along with their journey of knowledge for our technologies, because it is so complex. I don't think that there's a lot of AI out there that can do it at a very high level yet, but I do think that there are certain basic things that we can use it for that will reduce my need to hire, but more importantly, it will improve the experience of our partners.
I mean, just listening to you, a lot of my friends in Silicon Valley are very worried about, what's going to happen to their coding job. And so when I talk to that part of the world, maybe I should tell them they should start looking at channel ops, because it looks like the stable place to be, at least for the next 12 to 18 months, if they're looking for a change, because they can have an impact, but changes are possibly relatively slower than what's happening at an individual coding level or a writing level with these
Right.
using these tools. But we're coming to an end. I do want to ask you one last question. So when you think back, you have this amazing career. If you go back at the early stages of a career as a woman leader, as I told you right before the recording, my daughter is going to college. She's possibly will enter workforce at some point in time. So what would be your advice to yourself, like when you're starting your career, things that you have learned, how to be successful to where you are today? What would you do same? What would you do differently?
I think with doing the same, I think, even early in my career, I was at a very small company in my very first tech job in Boulder, Colorado. And our technology got acquired several times. So I went through a bunch of acquisitions. And I think being open to change and leaning in a little bit with risk. I'm not a risk averse person. I like the idea of doing something new and trying something different. And so I think that has lended itself well for me for my career. You have to be open to being a change agent and leading positively into change when it happens, and seeing where you can go. That not everything's going to end up perfectly, but certainly I think being available, open to change and open to learning is the most important thing.
That's quite amazing. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you in our Denver event.
Yes,
But thank you again for being here. Thank you.
thank you. I appreciate your time.